Hi everyone, my name is Adi, and if you haven't heard, the Series 8 rules did just drop, and we will be playing in GS Cup for Series 8 and Players Cup 3. I just wanted to share my reaction to this, which honestly is mostly disappointed. That's kind of strange because I actually really like GS Cup. 2019 Ultra Series was one of my favorite formats of all time, but I really dislike the way that TPCI or whoever's been making these decisions has handled the changing series for the last 6 months or so. The reason I say this is because the format really exists now for like 3 weeks at a time. After those 3 weeks and after Players Cup happens, there's just no reason to team build in the format and no reason to play the format because there's nothing of significance that happens. It's really sad to me because I think that team building is so much more interesting after the first 3 weeks or so, after we start to get tournament results, and you can look at the metagame and you can try to understand those teams that have done well, understand what makes them do well, identify the patterns in the teams and the trends in the metagame, and really abuse those patterns with interesting meta calls and tech choices. And that never exists if after Players Cup 3, everyone just stops playing. And that's honestly what's been happening. It's just very disappointing to me that that's the way this is going. I've been thinking about Series 7 a lot recently. I found some very interesting techs that beat a lot of the Pokemon in the format that abuse the fact that, for example, every single team tries to win the game in the end game in the exact same way. And it's just very disappointing to me as a player and a team builder. And then it's also very disappointing to me as a content creator because I personally make a lot of backwards facing content. You're never going to see me making these like brash speculative videos where I top 10 Pokemon in Series 8 2 days into the format. Like, you don't know that. I don't know that. No one knows that. The only way you do that is by testing extensively, playing a lot, looking at tournament results, and that just never happens, right? And so for me, I like to make videos where I'm looking at the top teams, understanding why they're doing well, talking to the players who have done well, and seeing what they saw in the metagame that let them do well. And that type of content doesn't really exist in a world where this format ends every 2 months and really ends after a month. So I'm going to personally have to reevaluate the type of content that I'm making because it clearly doesn't fit within what TPCI wants to do with their series for the foreseeable future. And I'm sad because I don't get to share teams like this, which is a very, very cool Series 7 team that identified trends in the metagame and picked some very unique Pokemon that haven't really seen play, but happen to do very well into the metagame right now. That is exactly the type of team building that I want to do. And honestly, I have been doing for a little bit and just haven't ever gotten to show because it doesn't matter anymore. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I did work really hard in it, and then the format just decided it doesn't matter anymore. So, uh, without further ado, here's the actual video that I recorded. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Top Team Testing. In this series, I analyze a recently successful team and go over its strengths, weaknesses, and common game plans through the lens of several replays, including a best of 3. After one 15-minute video, you should feel comfortable bringing this team to an online tournament, of which there are apparently none this weekend. If you know of anything, please comment down below because I would love to hear about it. As you're probably well aware, the Players Cup 3 qualifiers just finished up last weekend. I personally finished 57th overall with a 1731 rating using the team from the last top team testing video. So if you haven't seen that yet, the team is still very meta relevant. Now, some of the top teams from this IC were very interesting and different. On screen, we have the top 10 teams overall, courtesy of Liberty Note, and in this video, we are going to be focusing on the team that finished 6th. The player released a very detailed team report in Japanese, which is of course linked in the description. The team's primary Dynamax is Lapras. The overall bulk of the team combined with Gmax Resonance allows you to slow the game down for 5 turns, and this is often enough time to pick up the 2 KOs needed for Lapras to click Parry Song and win the game. It has Ice Beam over Freeze Dry or Blizzard, which is a strange compromise of lack of damage and lack of coverage that I really don't agree with, but we'll go with it. The secondary Dynamax is an Assault Vest Garchomp, which has fantastic support move in Breaking Swipe, as well as the perfect typing to cover the electric types that Lapras really doesn't like. It also has great max move coverage for the entire format with Max Wormwind, Max Quake, and Max Rockfall. Other than Parry Song, there are 2 ways this team wins the game. The Ferrothorn has Iron Defense, Body Press, and Leech Seed, and can very quickly become unkillable. This is especially true with Rain, or Screens, or Max Quake boosts, or a combination thereof. This is your primary endgame damage dealer, and the team relies on it heavily. You can also win games with Porygon 2, which individually 1v1s almost everything in the format. Incineroar rounds out the defensive core, as it often does, and this one has Protect over a support move to help win Perish endgames. Finally, the last Pokemon is Magnet Tapu Koko. This rarely comes to games, but in some matchups you do need extra speed and damage, which the rest of the team kinda lacks. In most games, the pacing of the team is to take a KO and boost your bulk with Dynamax, creating pins with your Porygon 2, Ferrothorn, and your last Mon to take a second KO, and then win the game with Perish Song, Porygon 2, or Ferrothorn. With that, let's get into the games. This game showcases how Life Orb Lapras can punch through teams. Our opponent leads Regieleki and Urshifu, while we lead Lapras and Garchomp. We go for a max guard to cover for Unseen Fist, and are protected from the Volt Switch. This lets us KO the Regieleki with Earthquake, and then take a little over half with Garchomp from Wicked Blow. Our opponent brings in Landorus, but this smells like bait. They immediately switch it out for Tapu Fini, and Breaking Swipe does nothing from -1 in Misty Terrain. Their Wicked Blow KOs the Garchomp, and we Resonance the Urshifu to knock it out in response. They bring in Landorus again, and we bring in our Porygon 2. They go for a Fly, and a Calm Mind lets them dodge our Resonance. Now, we set up Trick Room, and I'm not sure if Perish Song hits Pokemon that are Flying type, so I go for a Protect. It turns out it does, but it ends up not mattering, since I get a Perish Song off next turn anyways, and our opponent quickly forfeits. This game demonstrates how difficult it is for opponents to power through both Porygon 2 and Ferrothorn in the endgame. Our opponent leads Grimmsnarl and Rotom Heat into Lapras and Incineroar, and they switch out Rotom into Porygon 2 right away as we Gigantamax. They set up Light Screen, and we parting shot the Porygon 2, going into Ferrothorn before setting up Resonance onto the Grimmsnarl. They set up Reflect, and our Max Geyser drops Grimmsnarl down to red. Lapras gets hit with an Eerie Impulse, and Ferrothorn gets up an Iron Defense. Next turn, Max Geyser KOs the Grimmsnarl while they tickle the Lapras with a Tri-Attack, but more importantly, they paralyze it. We get off another Iron Defense, and they bring in Rotom as our Dynax ends. They smartly protect the Rotom, and Tri-Attack does another chunk to Lapras as we double up onto the Rotom's Protect with Hydro Pump and Body Press. They max the Rotom and go for a Max Lightning, and along with the Tri-Attack, they do just enough to KO the Lapras. A +4 Body Press does about a third to Rotom through Reflect, and we bring in our Porygon 2. They go for a Max Flare in the rain with screens up, and it does 99% to Ferrothorn with a clutch survival, and their Porygon 2 goes for an Eerie Impulse into ours. We get another Body Press off, and we set up Trick Room. Here, we both switch out our Porygons, and theirs goes into Celesteela while ours goes into Incineroar. Body Press does half to Celesteela, and Rotom finally picks up the KO on Ferrothorn as its Dynamax ends. Now, they double Protect on the possible Fake Out, which is also the last turn of Light Screen and the penultimate turn of Reflect. From here, we get a Tri-Attack off on the Rotom and a Flare Blitz on the Celesteela. I was hoping for one of them to KO, but we end up getting 2 KOs. Now they bring in Porygon 2, and unwilling to play out this ridiculous endgame, they concede. One issue with this team is its reliance on a limited number of options for damage output. If your Dynamax doesn't do damage and your Ferrothorn doesn't do damage, you're going to have a hard time winning the game. In this game, our opponent leads Primarina and Thundurus into our Tapu, Koko, and Lapras. We max the Lapras, and Primarina protects. Lapras gets hit with a Prankster Eerie Impulse, but the double up is still enough to KO the Thundurus. They bring in their Gothitelle, and honestly, I completely forgot that thing got Fake Out. They hit the Koko with the Fake Out, and with screens, we do live the Dynamax Primarina's Max Starfall, but we do absolutely nothing to the Primarina with a Max Resonance. Gothitelle protects, and we Volt Switch off the Primarina into Ferrothorn, which eats the Starfall like breakfast. We then Resonance into the Gothitelle's Protect, and we've really got nothing going for us. Max Starfall chunks the Lapras, and Gothitelle taunts the Ferrothorn, making it functionally useless. We don't have Freeze Dries, so we sit and Ice Beam the Gothitelle, and Ferrothorn really just sits there. Now, barring a crit, we're going to do nothing for a couple turns until they take a KO. They get to protect on our attacks, while Dazzling Gleam does chunk the Lapras. Next, their double protect fails, and a second Dazzling Gleam does pick up the KO on Lapras, which means we finally get to bring in Tapu Koko. Now, here, I read the Primarina to protect and Thunderbolt the Gothitelle. Not only does that not KO, but Primarina also doesn't protect and knock out the Koko instead with a Dazzling Gleam, leaving the Ferrothorn taunted. We bring in Porygon 2, which also gets taunted, and a few turns later, Incineroar comes in and KOs my Ferrothorn, at which point we concede. This game features Garchomp, the other Dynamax target of the team. In testing, it was especially good in the Sun matchup, and this game is no exception. Our opponent leads Landorus and Venusaur, and we lead Incineroar and Garchomp. We hard switch Incineroar into Porygon 2, and they Dynamax the Venusaur. Garchomp goes for a breaking swipe to drop Landorus' attack stat, but Landorus U-turns off the Porygon 2 into their own Porygon 2, which gets the download special attack boost. They then further boost their special attack stats with a max ooze. Figuring they have to Vine Lash this turn, I double switch into Incineroar and Ferrothorn as they Vine Lash the Ferrothorn and Ice Beam the Incineroar. They then go for a Max Quake, which gets a critical hit through the Shuca Berry to KO the Incineroar, but I don't know if the critical hit mattered. And then they try attack the Ferrothorn, which chunks it as it goes for an Iron Defense. Garchomp comes back in, and we really need to get some Max Quakes off because their special attack stat is too damn high. Venusaur switches out for Landorus, but I choose to Max Quake the Porygon 2 before only taking half damage from a +2 Ice Beam and KOing it back with a Body Press from our boosted Ferrothorn. They reveal their last Pokemon is a Torkoal, and I go for a Max Quake into it as Landorus U-turns off the Garchomp. Funnily enough, they were taking rough skin damage either way. Now, Venusaur comes in, and I mistakenly choose to Iron Defense with Ferrothorn as they KO the Ferrothorn with Heat Wave. No worries, we still have a Porygon 2 in the back. We bring it in, and they switch Torkoal out for Landorus, and they go for a Frenzy Plant, which fails to KO and allows us to KO back with a Max Quake and an Ice Beam. Torkoal comes back in, and it goes for a Protect as we Breaking Swipe to drop the Landorus' attack stat. Rock Slide KOs the Garchomp, which was at like 1 HP, and Tri-Attack fires into the Protect. They go for another Rock Slide the next turn, and thankfully, they don't get the flinch, and we KO the Torkoal with the Tri-Attack. They try for a last-ditch Earthquake critical hit, and when they don't get it, they concede. Now let's move on to the best of 3. This shows off another weakness of the team, the heavy reliance on Ferrothorn to do damage in the endgame. Now, in some sense, these teams are very similar. They both use a lot of damage mitigation and rely heavily on their Dynamax to do damage, while the other Pokemon really don't. The first several turns of this game are very position heavy, with neither of us wanting to give up a KO or commit to going offensive too early. Instead, we try to chip down our opponents when we can and find a good spot to Dynamax. We have more consistent damage output with Porygon 2 and Body Press on Ferrothorn, while they have Nightshade on their Dusclops. Every turn that goes by is a turn less of screens that we have to deal with, but they can also punish our passive play by firing off Sleep Powders. Now, the real kicker is that Dusclops has Bind. Incineroar can still Parting Shot out, but if they can trap something else, then they can bring in their own Incineroar and either snarl it so it does no damage and can't switch out, or they can Flare Blitz the Ferrothorn and KO it. Now, on turn 10, which we are still not at, oh, here we go. On turn 10, he finally gets what he wants. He traps the Ferrothorn with Bind, and he also Parting Shots out with Incineroar into Venusaur. This is his chance to Dynamax. So we switch Porygon 2 into the Incineroar, and we end up getting crit on the Vine Lash. We also Nightshades the Ferrothorn, and we go for an Iron Defense, and because of the critical hit, Incineroar sadly goes down. We bring in our Lapras, and with the screens gone, we can commit to our own Dynamax. We take a lot of damage from their G-Max Vine Lash, but return the favor with a G-Max Resonance. He misses the bind on Lapras, and we get a Leech Seed off on Dusclops. Now, there's a lot of end of turn things to go. Leftovers on Ferrothorn, G-Max Vine Lash, in Leech Seed, and Bind, and then we both go for a Max Guard. He Nightshades the Ferrothorn again as it goes for an Iron Defense. Now his Dynamax ends, and this turn, we will wait for all the stuff to go, and this turn we protect the Ferrothorn as he doubles into it, and we KO the Venusaur in return. Now Lapras does go down to the residual damage at the end of the turn, and that means we bring in Porygon 2, and he brings in his Incineroar. Now, maybe Ferrothorn can live the double up? It turns out it can't. And we Trick Room to set up a Ferrothorn endgame, since Porygon 2 isn't winning this on its own while Grimmsnarl has Taunt in the back. It does take a few more turns, but eventually he gets the KO and wins the game. On to game 2. The main adjustment I made this game was bringing Garchomp over Lapras. I realized screens don't really help me when most of his damage is residual. He also opted not to bring Landorus or Glastrier into game 1, making Garchomp a lot better. The other adjustment I made was prioritizing getting Trick Room up, because it allows Ferrothorn to do damage into anything that isn't Dusclops. This is especially important because damage into Venusaur makes his Dynamax a lot less strong. We do a lot better job of putting damage into things early game, and by early game I mean the first 9 turns of the game, although he does eventually manage to trap the Porygon 2 and the Ferrothorn. Now on turn 9, which we will eventually get to, well, anyways, it looks like we finally got to turn 9. So, we get this KO on the Grimmsnarl, which gives him a free switch into Venusaur and lets him take 2 knockouts on the next turn. One with Gmax Vine Lash into the Porygon 2, while the other with Nightshade into Ferrothorn. This lets us bring in both of our last 2 Pokemon, the Garchomp and the Incineroar. He switches Dusclops out into his Incineroar, and our Max Quake KOs the Venusaur. Flare Blitz does very little to his Incineroar. He brings his Dusclops back in, and really, we need all the damage we can get into this thing because we just might get 1v2'd by it. He fakes out the Incineroar, and we go for a Max Rockfall into the Dusclops to KO the Incineroar with residual damage and hopefully chunk the Dusclops. He also sets up Trick Room this turn, and from here, it's just a question of whether we can out-damage the Dusclops. Pain Split does recover a lot, but in the end, we have just enough HP to live another Nightshade, and Trick Room expires at just the right time, allowing us to win the game. In this game, I decide I want to take an early KO onto Grimmsnarl. If he can't taunt me, we can set up Ferrothorn and Porygon 2 a lot easier, and if he can't get screens up, we can weaken his Pokemon much quicker. However, he opts not to lead Grimmsnarl, making this strategy a lot less sound. Tapu Koko allows for a lot less positional play, and he manages to get Grimmsnarl in a position to set up fully anyways. He also manages to trap the Porygon 2, and this really isn't a great spot. We opt not to max the Tapu Koko because he's getting his screens up anyways, and this leaves us with no really good Dynamaxes remaining. Tapu Koko very quickly gets whittled down, and Porygon 2 can't switch out to give itself another download boost to make it a better Dynamax. Once we KO the Grimmsnarl, he gets a free switch into Venusaur, which really has no reason not to Dynamax here. Tapu Koko goes down, and I incorrectly cover for the Sleep Powder because Electric Drain ended, but I also decide to max the Porygon 2. This allows it to take a hit and max strike to lower Venusaur's speed, which I hope will make it slower than Incineroar. This doesn't work because it turns out he's going to fire off a Trick Room. This might have been okay if Venusaur had died this turn 7, but instead it lives the max Hailstorm and the Flare Blitz with just a sliver of health, while the recoil from Vine Lash and Flare Blitz KO both of my Pokemon. From here, it's Ferrothorn versus the world. And the world includes an Incineroar, so I don't think it's going to work out. I try to get a defense boost to maybe live an attack from the Incineroar, but he resets Trick Room, which allows Incineroar to outspeed me, and while my defense boost does let me live the attack, the follow-up Nightshade is enough for him to win the match. So, what can we take away from this? Lapras is fine. It does the same things that it always has. It's great at setting up screens, and if you pick up KOs fast enough, you can end the game quickly with Parry Song. The real centerpiece of the team, however, is Ferrothorn. This team really takes advantage of the lack of Dusclops in the metagame. There aren't many other ghost types that will survive till the end game, and Ferrothorn matches up very, very well into almost every Pokemon that does. Body Press Ferrothorn is still an incredible endgame threat that has to be accounted for, especially as people substitute out their Dusclopses for Porygon 2. The other main takeaway is that Assault Vest Garchomp is very well positioned right now. Base 102 speed is enough to reduce the attack of most of the physical attackers in the game, and Ground is a very valuable type in this metagame. It can put in work while Dynamaxed, or support another attacker by taking out the electric types. To round out the team, Porygon 2 and Incineroar are the glue mons they always have been, while Tapu Koko is definitely expendable. In testing, the team performed extremely well for me, but there's still some big weaknesses. First off, the team has 4 fighting weaknesses. Most of the fighting types have counterplay, but ironically, things like Body Press are very difficult to deal with. Furthermore, the team has most of the same weaknesses as other Lapras teams. After your 3 max turns, Lapras puts out very little pressure and is pretty easy to weaken. The rest of the team relies heavily on Ferrothorn for damage, so if your opponent can prevent those Pokemon from doing big damage, say with something like a Dusclops, you're often stuck not doing very much. This is fine into most of the metagame right now, but you will run into teams where you just lack damage output. Once your screens run out, your opponent can power through your team, and that's especially true if they can position a good Pokemon to give boost to. If you're interested in trying this team out, there's a link to the paste in the description down below, as well as the team report. The team report also includes a rental code, but it's locked behind a roughly $1 paywall. The team report also includes game plans against many common cores that I've put on the screen right now. I've personally found a lot of ladder success with this team, so I encourage you to try it out, and if you think this team is cool, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. Until next time, I'll see you all later.